Hello, this session is on experiments. We tend to think of an experiment as being something that scientists do in a laboratory, and we tend to think of that as a general term for what scientists do. However, an experiment is something very specific. An experiment is differentiated from other designs, for example surveys and observational designs, by the fact that the researcher does something during the course of the experiment. In other words, there's an intervention. Now, the intervention can take place in a before and after study, where you study a group, do something to it and measure it afterwards, or where you measure the effect in one group and not in another, in other words in a control group, but these are all experiments. The best experiments have got a control group and randomization between the control group and the group to which you're doing something. Those are called true experiments. If there's no control group, or if you're just doing before and after measurements, or any other compromise on the design, that's called a quasi-experiment, but nevertheless it falls under the description of experiment. Again, just to be clear, the defining or the cardinal feature of an experiment is that there's an intervention, something is done during the course of the experiment. Now, in clinical research, we tend to think of the gold standard method of differentiating cause and effect as being the randomized, controlled, double-blind clinical trial, the RCT, the randomized controlled trial. And what I want you to take out of this session is the cardinal features of a randomized, controlled, double-blind trial. In other words, I want you to understand the concept of randomization, the concept of control, and the concept of blinding. And not only to understand them, but to be able to understand why they're required. Essentially, randomization is used to minimize bias. Control is used to be able to differentiate the effect of the intervention from what might have happened to the group anyway. In other words, historical and maturational effects. And blinding is used to minimize bias in the people who are making the measurements of the outcome. And blinding, as you will see, can be single or double-blinded. The best is double-blinded, but sometimes it's not possible, especially within clinical or especially within nursing research, to effect double-blinding, but at least we can try to effect single-blinding. Now, there are other more complex designs. A randomized controlled trial is usually just one group versus another, but there are more complex designs, 2x2 group designs, factorial designs. These are designs that are meant to test many groups at once and to be able to look at every possible combination of cause, effect and control. However, as you might quickly begin to appreciate, these are very complicated and they usually require huge sample sizes, and it's very rare to see anything other than a straightforward clinical trial between a control group and a treatment group. Occasionally you might see a control group, a treatment group against another group, and that's usually about as complex as it gets. So I don't want you to worry at all about the more complex designs. What I'd like you to do is to reiterate, learn about the cardinal features of a randomized controlled double-blind clinical trial, randomization, control and blinding.